Since the beginning of time, humankind has been in awe of the majesty of the heavens. Its ever-present beauty has inspired us to our greatest heights and fueled our curiosity to dream fantastic dreams. Yet paradoxically, it has also descended upon us with great ferocity. A tornado rips through an unsuspecting prairie city, turning an entire community upside down. Multiplied over 100 times is an outbreak of tornadoes in the Midwestern U.S. Two humbling moments in human history stand testament to nature's fury. The awe-inspiring majesty of the Western Canadian prairies. As beautiful today as they were to the immigrating settlers who first turned this land over 150 years ago. Those who could endure the extremes of her cold winters and hot summers found a place they grew to love and call home, harvesting the endless bounty of its vast farmland. Over the years, settlements begin to emerge and prosper. Foremost among these is Regina, a flourishing community. It is named after Queen Victoria, and in 1882 is designated the capital of the vast area known as the Northwest Territories. 30 years later, as the capital of the newly formed province of Saskatchewan, Regina is one of the fastest growing cities in Western Canada.
People were quite excited about the place. This looked like it really was going to be a city of quite significance. We'd become a city legally in 1903, but here we are looking like we were going to be really something of a city.
Sunday, June 30th, 1912, the eve of Dominion Day. Regina finds itself in the grip of an early summer heat wave.
It was an oppressively hot day for June the 30th. And of course, kids were out of school. Most of the people, they were lolling around in the backyard around, especially on the porch. Porches were great in those days.
That afternoon, Wilfred Bealby is doing just that, as his wife prepares Sunday dinner for him and their 3-year-old daughter. Just outside the Bealby home, local carpenter Arthur Donaldson is walking his dog. Others take the opportunity to share the day with friends, including entrepreneur Frank Blankhorn and his wife Bertha, immigrants to Canada from England.
The Blankhorns were a young couple from England who had gotten married about 2nd or 3rd of April that year, and they had booked passage on the Titanic. And they missed their connection with the boat, and the Titanic sailed without them.
But many find respite from the heat the good old-fashioned way.
One major attraction in the city at that time was there was a beach in Wascana Lake. People would be out there trying to get cool by swimming or boating or things like that.
Among those at the lake that day are 11-year-old Bruce Langton and his friend Philip Steele, who paddle their canoe through the cooling waters. Leonard Marshall, age 12, swims at a pier near the Regina Boat Club. For other children, Sunday school is the order of the day. Among those in attendance that afternoon is 7-year-old Anna Brandt. In the burgeoning warehouse district, a salesman by the name of Ingram and his boss, Mr. Joseph J. Bryan, find themselves both working over the weekend. Yet within the summer heat, unseen atmospheric elements are conspiring to combine with deadly force.
It was actually about 4 days of very hot weather just prior to that tornado developing. After a number of days where it's been hot, and then all of a sudden you might get an invasion of cold air from the west, providing a trigger that forces this warm, moist air upward very quickly and can develop into severe weather and in some cases a tornado. The skies would have darkened very quickly because of where the sun was on that particular part of the day, and the winds may have gotten fairly gusty prior to the actual arrival of the tornado itself.
The very, very few number of tornadoes or hurricanes that hit the prairie provinces, you can understand how people were not prepared in any sense of the word, emotionally or mentally.
In Regina, people noticing the storm coming in from the south breathe a sigh of relief, welcoming the cooling effects that the coming rains will no doubt bring. But on the prairie, everything becomes momentarily still, then without warning, erupts into violence.
An extremely blackish cloud came in from the east, traveling in a westward direction, and at the same time a cloud formed in the southwest of Regina and began coming toward the city. These two met, and from that a smoke dropped down to the earth and struck what was then a farming district.
The tail of the tornado touches down on a nearby farmyard.
And the first farm, the tornado kind of touched down in the yard, the chicken hit the grain bins where the chicken feed and other feed was, and just picked it up, and it was gone.
Then, without warning, the funnel cloud vanishes. Moments later, it crashes down on a second farmyard a few miles to the north.
And so this comes down with a crack, and it just cleans off the clothesline, and loads or dumps a bunch of that sand and grit and feed all through the place.
The funnel cloud reappears without warning. Those watching from Regina see the fingers of two tornadoes collide, culminating to form one giant tornado.
It was the Sunday school superintendent who came down and said, "Children, there's a terrible storm coming. You run home, grab your books right now, run home as fast as you can." The sky was black, and all these cases, it looked like wooden cases, way up in the sky.
They probably saw a lot of debris in the air flying around, and of course once that debris starts flying, then it starts impacting things.
One of the first buildings in the tornado's path is the newly constructed Saskatchewan Legislative Building.
As it got directly south of the legislative buildings in Regina, it suddenly changed its mind and it headed straight towards the city itself. It came down and struck the end of Wascana Lake.
And there are people on the lake paddling for home as fast as they can do, trying to bring people to shore who are out there, and swimmers are the same. And this is just coming down like mad.
But Bruce Langton and Philip Steele are too far out to escape the tornado's rapid movement. They are picked up and hurled into Wascana Park at the north shore of the lake. Leonard Marshall finds himself in a boathouse on shore when the tornado hits, but he too is unable to escape its rapid advance.
I was inside the building hurrying to get dressed. I had about half my clothes on when the storm struck the lake and the boathouse with a terrible roar and a crash of tearing timbers. What happened after the boathouse was struck, I can't say. I found myself about 150 yards from the lakeshore. I don't know how I got there, but the rain and hail revived me and I got up after several tries and ran.
Anna Brandt manages to arrive at her house unscathed.
That was the outstanding thing, I think, on that day, on the Sunday, that we got home safe and ran upstairs and crawled into bed and pulled the pillows over our heads so we wouldn't hear that awful storm.
The tornado continues its northward push up Smith and Lorne Streets.
Things started to happen to buildings. Buildings that were not well constructed had some problems. There were a lot of homes in there that were older and not well constructed.
Upon seeing the advancing storm, Bealby evacuates his family to the attic to seek refuge. As it surges towards downtown, the tornado rips the attic from the house, hurling it through the air. At the same time, the Blankhorns are making their way across Victoria Park, scrambling to beat the storm. They scurry down an alley, hoping the surrounding buildings will shelter them from the tornado. The next building in the tornado's path is the telephone exchange.
Fortunately, there was only a skeletal staff of employees on that day, but when their building was demolished, it exploded the walls outward.
Telephone operators accompanied 2 tons of switchboard equipment on a terrifying 30-foot free fall into the basement.
They were just terrified, absolutely terrified. And they were screaming and they were just in absolute panic.
The tornado moves into the rail yard. Train cars are flung about like toys by its overwhelming force.
I think in and around the rail yards there was, pretty complete devastation there, which tells me that, at least 300 km/h winds were probably involved in that.
Continuing its deadly route, the tornado moves into the warehouse district.
We were in the office, and we could see that an extra heavy storm was coming. But almost before we could think, we were under this pile of wreckage.
Finally, the tornado careens off into the prairies north of the city.
After about a half hour from being sighted, it suddenly just disappeared as rapidly as it had risen.
In less than 3 minutes, the storm has left a path of destruction 4 blocks wide and a little over 2 miles long. For the people of Regina, the nightmare is far from over. When the storm passes, people emerge to find a shockingly altered landscape.
Telephone lines, of course, were down. The telegraph lines were down. And all this, so communication was cut.
Almost immediately, people, men, women, and kids, began to form impromptu rescue squads.
Those at the telephone exchange building work furiously to get to those who are trapped.
This was one of the first buildings which the frightened crowd of rescuers attacked. The moans and cries of the girls buried in the debris made them work with a mad frenzy. 100 men, which soon grew to 200, worked like fiends to rescue those pinned beneath the wreck.
Miraculously, all 11 of the employees at the telephone exchange managed to emerge unharmed. A few blocks away, Marion and Wilfred Bealby emerge from their attic, also unharmed, but quickly make an alarming discovery.
But 3-year-old daughter Florence was quite a petite young child, and she was picked up, and she was sucked out and thrown into the street.
Up the street, one of the first fatalities of the storm is discovered.
He had taken shelter from the rain in the porch, and he had with him his little dog. And the dog lived, and he was hit. He was killed by falling debris from the house. And the dog waited very patiently there, and the body was taken up to Spears Funeral Home. The dog went up there and showed up there, and he was there for the man's funeral.
Bruce Langton is found alive in his canoe, which has landed on College Avenue, over 300 yards from the lake.
Young Steele was flown out and struck the ground and was killed. But the other kid, by the agitation of the canoe, was knocked out. He was found there, dazed, completely unconscious in this canoe and sitting bolt upright with the oar still clasped in his hand.
Farther north, 2 other bodies are discovered near the library.
This couple dashing across through there had been hit with a load of bricks, and they were killed in the lane between the library and what's now the Masonic Hall.
You know, here was a couple that had come 8,000 miles to die.
The tragic toll of the storm begins to deepen in the warehouse district. Pinned beneath the body of his dead boss, Ingram is eventually pulled free by rescue workers. The Bealbys run frantically through the wreckage, searching desperately for their daughter.
And they found her out in the street in an oven. Now, legend says that, you know, that's how she arrived there in the oven, but some people think that she crawled into the oven for shelter.
An increasing number of people join in as rescue efforts continue.
People who were visitors in towns got involved almost immediately. One of those visitors was Boris Karloff.
An unknown actor at the time, Karloff and his troupe are off on a picnic when the storm hits, returning to find the city in ruins.
He pitched in and he worked like most of the people did at the time, and clean up and things like that.
In the following days, his troupe stages a benefit performance of their play, donating half of the proceeds to the Cyclone Relief Fund. In the end, the tornado claims 28 lives and causes $5 million in damage. Regina's mayor officially cancels the Dominion Day celebrations as Reginans begin the task of picking up the pieces.
The speed with which they adapted and picked up their life again was absolutely fantastic, because within a week, most of the debris had been cleared up. And that's quite a feat for a small group like that.
Money pours in from everywhere. Both public and private sectors give generously to help get Regina back on its feet. But the city quickly finds that further assistance is required.
The city had to borrow from the province a huge amount of money for reconstruction. And the city was saddled with that huge debt. I was told by somebody it wasn't cleared finally until the 1960s.
With the Queen City intact once again, people begin to look for measures of prevention against the destructive forces of nature.
At that time, there was very common in building construction to use something called balloon construction, which allowed you almost to build an outside frame without anchoring it. But one of the things that came out of disasters such as this is an understanding that you can't build with balloon construction and survive storms.
To date, Regina has never seen a storm like the one that hit in 1912. Many people pray that it never will. But on the wings of every early summer storm lurks the possibility of a repeat performance. The coming of spring has long been considered a season of rebirth, a time when the slate is wiped clean so that life may begin again. Yet within a certain stretch of the American plains, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Dakotas, spring ushers in a force far more ominous. Dubbed Tornado Alley, 2,500 square miles east of an imaginary line running from Texas north to Nebraska, spawns more tornadoes per year than anywhere else on the planet. Warm air sweeping in from the Gulf of Mexico crosses the Great Plains, where it meets with southern traveling cool air. With nothing to stop these systems from colliding, these flatlands become a veritable breeding ground for tornadoes. By 1974, tornadoes have long since become a fact of life to the inhabitants of the region.
We have a little bit of everything. We have tornadoes, we have severe weather, winter weather, snow, but for the most part it's severe weather during the spring of the year.
But in Mexico of that year, the waters in the Gulf of Mexico are unseasonably warm, facilitating inland moving winds to pick up an inordinate amount of heat in the form of water vapor. A low pressure system pressing in from the west further speeds these winds across the Gulf, forcing more water vapor into the air and further energizing the system. As the system moves inland up Tornado Alley, it is quickly met by Arctic winds sweeping down from the north.
And with that type of dynamic setup in the atmosphere, where you had a lot of instability and things of causing divergence, all of these ingredients really became more magnified.
The converging systems collide over the prairies and form an explosive system known as a supercell. But due to all the concentrated energy, the supercell becomes alarmingly large.
Evansville, which is west of us, they had a radar operator 24 hours a day. They called us and told us they had a thunderstorm that was approaching Louisville that was off the top of the range height indicator on the radar, which is the RHI indicator, and it was like 70,000 feet.
It is later calculated that the cell has the equivalent energy of a hydrogen bomb explosion every 30 seconds. By the evening of April 2nd, 1974, meteorologists are anxiously monitoring the weather patterns bubbling within the deepening cell, looking for telltale signs of tornado activity.
At that time, the warning system consisted of a Weather Service radar, had the capability of detecting tornadic type signatures.
These signatures, known as hooks, appear as thunderstorms in the shape of a fish hook. But throughout the night on April 2nd, none are noted. Although April 3rd, 1974 begins quietly, those in weather circles know it is only the calm before the inevitable storm.
We knew that the conditions were favorable for tornado development, and everybody knew from 8 o'clock in the morning what day that was going to be. And it turned out to be one heck of a day.
Throughout the morning, weather officials issue 28 severe weather watches, covering an area from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border, and from the Mississippi River to the East Coast.
Those days, we had teletype systems. We didn't have computerized things like we do nowadays. We had a communicator. They typed up the warning and put it on in 75 words a minute.
Louisville, Kentucky radio station WHAS issues its first warning for Louisville at 10:28 a.m. Yet the day begins with little or no evidence of the dire warnings being issued over her airwaves. That afternoon, Louisville, Kentucky resident Jean Denker finds herself at home with her children.
Well, it was a beautiful day. It was sunshiny and warm, very nice, no weather problems or anything.
A similar sentiment is shared on a nearby golf course, where Barbara Hittinger enjoys a round of golf.
I was not a working mother. I stayed a stay-at-home mother. We had just built the house and moved in, been in there 5 months. My son was graduating from high school that year. My daughter was in 7th grade.
Likewise, in the city of Xenia, Ohio, 160 miles to the northwest, people continue about their Wednesday afternoon, as they have for years.
In Xenia, everything closes at noon on Wednesday. That's the day the doctors and the attorneys and school teachers and people go play golf or whatever. For some reason, that's always been traditional in Xenia.
Others, however, find themselves in occupations that do not afford such extravagances, such as Susan Hull, who works at a local drugstore. Down the road from the drugstore, Susan's 2 children, Chuck and Jenny, spend the afternoon with their babysitter.
And they were friends of the family, and I remember being at their house and that the TV was on and the dinner was being able to be cooked.
Others occupy themselves with the ordinary chores of day-to-day existence, like Lisa Hale, who along with her mother and brother go shopping for a birthday present for their grandmother.
And I recall the sun shining in the front of the car, and it was, I believe I remember the radio coming on with a caution about the weather that day. But it was like, at the time, I asked my mother, a tornado, what is a tornado? And she kind of said, oh, it's, you know, they don't happen around here, and just kind of brushed it off.
Lisa's grandmother, Irene, finds herself embroiled in her job as director of the American Cancer Society. But by early afternoon, outside the small community of DePauw, Indiana, 194 miles to the west, the supercell finally yields the inevitable. At 2:40 p.m., the first tornado of the system erupts. Tim and Claudia Nagel find themselves traveling just south of DePauw, towing their 23-foot camper trailer, and the tornado suddenly descends upon them. 2/3 of DePauw are leveled in mere minutes as the twister blazes through town. Miraculously, Tim and Claudia Nagel emerge from their vehicle unscathed, despite the fact that their trailer has been launched into a bluff of trees. 20 minutes later, the twister sets down in Palmyra, Indiana, without warning. Robert Taylor and his 6 employees dive for cover in his machine shop just as the tornado hits. The storm yields its first casualty as it tears through Palmyra's trailer park community, where Harvey Lee Peace is found dead in the remains of his trailer. This first tornado would last nearly 2 hours and cover 120 miles before finally dissipating. Those in Indiana try to warn surrounding states of the impending danger, but due to downed communications, are unable to do so. The Palmyra tornado cuts a deadly swath through southern Indiana, but is only one of 148 tornadoes that would touch down that day. Before it is finished, the storm front hurls another into Kentucky, striking the town of Brandenburg and catching residents unaware. In less than 60 seconds, the tornado levels the town of 1700, blowing the roof off the courthouse and obliterating the town church. At least one home completely disappears. Weather warnings continue to be issued throughout the day for the areas of Louisville and Xenia. But due to the temperate weather, and with no idea of what is happening in neighboring Indiana, the warnings are largely dismissed. Even as the skies begin to darken, people have little or no idea of the severity that lingers in the clouds overhead as the cell prepares to unleash the full brunt of its fury. By late afternoon, the emergency broadcast system peppers the airwaves with tornado warnings throughout the area beneath the killer storm front.
It started happening late in the afternoon, which most of the tornadoes occur from 3 o'clock on, and there was a lot of tornadoes in a lot of states.
By 4 p.m., 148 tornadoes ranging in size from F1 to F5 are reported to have touched down in at least 10 states.
The Vegeta scale goes from F0 to F5. 0 would be something on the scale of 42 to 72 miles an hour winds, light damage. And F2 would be something like 73 miles an hour to 112 miles an hour, moderate damage. And F4 would be 158 miles an hour to 206 miles an hour, and that is considerable damage. and for an F5 going from 206 to over 260 miles an hour.
Shortly after 4 p.m., the weather takes a dramatic turn. Skies cloud over so quickly that many people don't even notice. In Xenia, the situation becomes a carbon copy of the one in Louisville, catching most residents completely unaware as the cell hurls the deadliest tornado of the system.
The local weatherman came on the news and said there's a tornado watch. And I thought, he's got to be kidding, because it was beautiful.
Others, such as Susan Hull and those patronizing the drugstore where she works, are simply dismissive of the warnings.
Customers were coming in and said that they had just heard that there had been a tornado that had touched in Bellbrook, which is like 6 miles from Xenia. And I said, well, you know, there's not really that much to worry about, because tornadoes come down, they touch down, they go back up, they're gone.
But at the weather office in Louisville's Standiford Field, the situation is altogether different. Just before 4 p.m. that afternoon, meteorologist intern Russell Conger arrives for his shift amidst a cast of very tense co-workers.
My duty that day was, I came in at 4 o'clock and I worked to midnight.
Moments after Conger's arrival, radar technician Jim McFarland notices the telltale hook forming on his screen.
He came out of the radar room and said a tornado was about 2.5 miles away. And everybody, at that point, everybody went to the window looking for it.
At 4:37 p.m., Conger and his co-workers look on as a giant tornado materializes before their very eyes.
Everybody ran for cover at that point, and the meteorologist in charge who was talking to the radio station, he slammed the phone down, he said, I'm going.
Across Louisville, the terrible realization of what is happening finally begins to sink in.
Our oldest daughter, Trini, walked to the door and she said, Mommy, why are the clouds sitting on the house across the street? I came in, and when I did, it was extremely, extremely black. And I could only think of one thing, and that was tornado. And I just said, get to the basement fast.
Having returned home from the golf course a short time earlier, Barbara Hittinger emerges from the shower in time to witness a terrifying sight.
I looked out the bedroom window and there was this pea soup green cloud in the sky. And I opened up the window to get a better look at it because I thought this is going to be quite some thunderstorm. And as I stood there watching it, it took the roof off at Dunn Elementary School.
The survival instinct takes over, sending everyone running for safety below ground. Above them, the unseen forces that have set upon them mercilessly make their presence known.
It was a loud roaring noise, like a railroad train, just, I mean, very, very loud. It stopped up our ears and everything. It just was, the pressure was intense.
I thought that the whole top of my head had been taken off. I heard nothing but glass breaking all over.
Barbara Hittinger finds getting to the basement in time is only half the battle.
The girl that was with us kept wanting to go home, screaming that she wanted to go home and tried to go home. And Joan and I both restrained her because we knew that there was no way she could get out of the house and get across the street to her home in safety.
In Xenia, the situation becomes a carbon copy of the one in Louisville, catching most residents completely unaware.
I was in the front of the store. As kids will do, I was looking at the bubblegum machines and wishing I had a nickel or a penny. And I remember my uncle coming in. He had an alarmed look on his face. And about that time, the lights started to flicker.
Then I started hearing the noises like trains. And I pulled back the curtain in the doctor's office and saw debris. I thought it was birds or something, but it was bricks from construction they were doing at the hospital at the time. And it was the housing development, pieces of houses blowing around.
Rosemary Foley watches helplessly as the tornado rips through Xenia. Upon seeing the funnel cloud, Susan Hull's thoughts turn immediately to her children, who she realizes are directly in the path of the oncoming tornado.
I tried to call her to see if she was aware that there's weather going on outside, strange weather. So, but the phones were already dead. There was no contact, and so I couldn't do anything but just hope that she knew it and was taking cover.
At the babysitter's house, the husband works frantically to get his wife and children to safety.
He was a wild man. He was yelling, he was screaming at her, he was taking his kids. He threw open a door that was inside their house and started throwing his kids down in there, and I just froze. And he came over and yanked me up.
The tornado hits the home of Chuck Haynes' babysitter head on, just as they make it into the basement.
I just remember kneeling on the floor, and it was all pitch black except for the little light that was at the top. And we just kind of waited, and we heard a loud noise.
A moment later, it converges on the drugstore a few short blocks down the street.
It was a very loud noise, and it, to me, sounded like a jet airplane. It took the roof off of the building, broke the front glass.
Inside the drugstore, Lisa Hale and her mother take cover while the tornado rages outside, then all at once disappears. The residents of Xenia are caught without warning. What seems like an eternity lasts only a few minutes, followed by an eerie silence as people slowly begin to emerge from what is left of their homes and their businesses.
What I saw reminded me a lot of the pictures that you saw from World War II of the bombed out cities. Broken brick walls, a lot of debris laying around, just devastation.
When I got to the top of the steps, I looked around and I just said, "Don't cry, but we don't have a house anymore."
Minds race to comprehend the force it must have taken to cause such complete and utter destruction.
The tornado that went through Louisville was an F4, which is like incredible damage. 4 is pretty strong. I don't know, I think it's 163 miles an hour or more.
People race through debris-filled streets in an attempt to find family members. Others stay right where they are, despite the efforts of rescue crews to evacuate the area.
I absolutely refused to leave because I knew my husband was on the way home from work. I didn't want him coming up and seeing no house. Absolutely, just nothing left of the house at all, and not knowing where we were. So we stood at the end of the driveway until he came.
Happily, Lisa Hale and her mother are fortunate enough to be quickly reunited with Lisa's father. But their sense of relief is quickly shattered.
Our thoughts immediately turned to my grandmother, my father's mom, who worked in the city.
But for Susan Hull, all she can think about are her 2 kids as she races to her babysitter's house.
I got to the beginning of the street, and just the whole street had been leveled. I mean, there were hardly any houses standing at all. And I had just at that moment lost all hope. And I did not want to find my children. And I mean, I thought I had no hope for them. I turned around, I remember turning around, and I says, "I can't find my children that way."
Lisa's parents search diligently, but are unable to find Irene Hale, and are about to give up when a strange thing happens.
As they both started to walk away, my mother and my father, they said it was odd how something just struck them at the same time. They kind of looked at each other and turned around and went back into where the office area was. And my father says, as if guided, he went to the exact spot where he lifted up some rubble and found his mother, and she had been killed. When they picked me up that night, and the first thing I did when I got into the car is I asked my father, "How's Grandma?" And he broke down, and it was the only time in my life my father's ever been upset in front of me.
Meanwhile, Susan Hull continues her frantic search for her children. It is not long before she finds them.
We were walking down the road, and then my mom was coming up the road, and the babysitter started yelling to my mom, telling her we're all right. And I remember her coming up to us and crying, which I didn't really understand because nothing to me that had happened other than this big loud noise that went through.
Of all the areas besieged by tornadoes that day, Xenia, Ohio is the hardest hit, suffering 38 casualties and more than 1,600 injured. The 1974 super outbreak of tornadoes proves to be the worst in U.S. history. In less than 24 hours, 127 tornadoes touched down in 13 states. Damages are estimated to be in the hundreds of millions. People salvage what they can of their scattered belongings in an attempt to put their lives back together.
They came in with a bulldozer and a clam shovel and just literally lifted up walls, and then they'd wait a few minutes and you could go in and rummage around, see if there was anything salvageable, and then you'd lift up some more debris. They were very nice about that.
In true Midwestern fashion, people converge on the area from as far away as Oklahoma to volunteer in the cleanup and reconstruction.
We just looked one morning and 2 vans pulled up out front, and there were about 12 Mennonites, and a car pulled up and there were 6 Amish, and they came in and they just started taking over, and they were clearing things, and we had a very wonderful man, 82 years old, that was up on the roof taking shingles and everything off up there.
Slowly but surely, the people of the Midwest persevere. Yet in the face of such tragedy, people try to make sense of their world, which has been so drastically altered.
The whole thing was, I mean, there's a period where you're just in total disbelief, you're in shock. You're getting over the grief of your loss, the loss of my grandmother. She was just such a wonderful person, and how could this happen? How could God do this, you know? And why to our town? And just the whole thing was just too much.
Others look at the event and rationalize it as a divine intervention of a different sort.
My mother was in the process of getting a divorce. The tornado happened on Wednesday, and her divorce was to be final on the Friday, and the courthouse was struck by the tornado, so it took all of her paperwork and threw it across the city.
I really seriously thought of dropping the divorce because I thought it was God speaking to me, telling me that they spared my children, so I shouldn't do it. But it didn't turn out anyway.
As with any disaster, thoughts turn to how to prevent future catastrophes of the same magnitude.
Well, as a result of the 1974 tornado, we have tornado sirens that were purchased through federal money. There are 5 sirens here in town and 5 sirens in Xenia Township, which surrounds the city. Those are activated once a tornado has been confirmed.
The advent of Doppler radar is able to increase warning time up to as much as 47 minutes, giving residents in areas of potential tornado activity ample time to prepare. But for those involved in the super outbreak, no technological advance will ever displace the sense of despair that comes with the darkening skies.
I try to live life one day at a time after that, because it can change in an instant. Every storm has that potential for me.
I don't think anybody that's been in a tornado will ever completely get over it. I can see the fury on my front porch. The 15-foot beam that supported our porch was found 4 doors down the street. And so when I look at that, I think that there's a power greater than what I've ever known.
In the final analysis, the power rests with us to find ways to coexist with the world around us. We are and will always remain a design of nature herself, forever susceptible to her whims.